it really feels like God is loving you when you are in the energy of a Pleiadian. It's quite beautiful. They're going to be the first in open contact because they look like humans.
Rebecca Videnoff, welcome. I'm so excited to have you on my podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. So to start us off, could you give a brief introduction, who you are, what you do?
Yes. So I am a professional psychic medium. I am a galactic channeler. So I channel different galactic beings and galactic collectives. I also read in the Akashic records. So I work pretty extensively in the Akashic records. And I am a Reiki practitioner. So I do that stuff as well. But really, I just look at the whole deal as working with energy, I think. So those are some of the labels, but that's really what it is.
Could you talk about the beginning of your journey? How did you get into this spiritual side of things? Was it your childhood that you had already tapped into your spiritual gifts, or did that happen later in your life?
So I've been on an intense spiritual journey for about 5 years, and practicing like as a professional energy worker. I had a very, very traumatic childhood, as many starseeds and light workers do. And as a result of that childhood, in order to cope, I leaned into drugs and alcohol. And I struggled with drugs and alcohol until I was about 35. I'm about to be 40. So from kind of the age of 12 all the way up until about 35. So I'm in long-term recovery. It's how I met my husband. I met my husband in recovery as well. I got sober in a 12-step program. And if you're familiar with 12-step programs, they are spiritually based programs. And so it kind of cracked me open. I kind of had to go through, like, I can clearly look back and see that I had, like, the trauma that I came here to heal had to manifest in the way that it did so that I could see it and heal through that energy. And, hindsight is, it's 2020. Like, I was such an empath as a child, and I was receiving clairaudient messages from my guides, but I didn't recognize it as such. It felt like just an internal monologue. Looking back, I can clearly see that I was receiving very clairaudient messages from my spirit guides. But being such an empath and growing up and being a young child in a very abusive home, that energy was so overwhelming. It was agonizing, really. And it makes so much sense to me that, I leaned into substances in order to numb that agony, because when you are spiritually sensitive, you just feel the pain of others so intensely. And the people, the adults in my home, were in an immense amount of pain. And so I was feeling not only that, but the way in which I was raised was very dysfunctional. And so all of that for a little girl psychic, empath, it's a lot. And so I did the best that I could to keep myself safe from that. And so for the better part of 2.5 decades, I quieted my gifts because it made it easier. It made it so that I could stay alive, in a sense. So that's the long and the short of it. But I did have a massive kind of cracked open experience when I decided to live a sober life and I moved into sobriety and took away the things that were numbing all of those gifts for all of those years.
Yeah, I love how you said that you were numbing the gifts, because the gifts were always there. It's just a matter of tapping into them or not. So at what point, I know you said you had a crack. At what point did that crack happen, and what was it like for you to, like, this switch in your head to start tapping into yourself?
Such a good question. It wasn't necessarily like a white light moment for me, but it did happen very quickly. Within the first 90 days of my sobriety, I went through the 12 steps in a 12-step program. And the purpose of going through the 12 steps is to have a spiritual awakening. That is literally the direct purpose of any 12-step program. And the way that we do that is we remove the things that are blocking us by taking a personal inventory of the way that we had been living. And so there's a very beautiful therapeutic process that is embedded in those steps. And that's what did it. And, you know, initially there's all this talk about God and, you know, what God is and what you want God to be. And my experience was that I wanted sobriety so badly. I didn't want to live the way I was living anymore, because it worked until it didn't work anymore, you know. That I just did what was asked of me, what my sponsor asked of me. And instead of having to figure out what God is, God just revealed himself to me. God just comes as you shed those layers, and it doesn't have to take a long time. Like I said, it only took about 3 months, and I no longer had any kind of desire to use substances, and I felt the joy of God in my heart. Like I was literally cracked open and allowed that spirit to come in, but also be reignited within me, because that idea of God, that spark of God, is in all of us, right? It never leaves.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So
So you were kind of
thank you.
letting yourself strip off all that was put onto you through your childhood, and through that, God revealed himself to you, or itself.
Yes, and it's still an ongoing process. You know, several years later, I'm still working through a lot of that shadow. But I definitely have a clear understanding that the healed path, or the path of healing, is the more desirable path for sure.
Right. Can you remember one of the first little steps that you did, that you were following your soul, you were following the path that was laid out before you?
Oh my gosh, what a cool question. I have there's a particular uh, memory that I have. So I struggled with feelings as an adult child, as a child, you know, who experienced trauma. I struggled with issues in self-esteem, self-worth, feelings of not being enough, feeling inadequate, not fitting in, pretty much my entire life. But it was so prevalent as a child. It was already established within my psyche. And so I remember there was this group of neighborhood kids. I was probably in the 3rd grade. And there was this group of neighborhood kids we always hung out with. We were all within a few grades of each other. But the older kids had all paired up with boyfriends and girlfriends. And that was a big deal. And I was very envious. And I very much wanted to be a part of that. And I remember I was staring out my bedroom window, which was on the 2nd floor of my house, and I was watching these, I guess kind of creepily, I was watching these neighbor kids, you know, walk down the street, and I felt this longing to, like, be a part of. And I'm sure that there are so many people who can relate to that, some, you know, form of that feeling. And I clearly heard And this was the first time I can clearly remember a clairaudient message, a direct telepathic message from my guides was, it's not always going to be this way. And I just, for the longest time, and there was such a comfort in the energy of that. And at the time I couldn't articulate that, oh, it's this energy that I'm feeling and I'm getting a direct message from my guides. It just felt like kind of my internal monologue. And for many years, I even thought, oh, I was just a really smart, insightful kid, you know, and that was my thought. But looking back, I can clearly see that was my team with me, feeling the pain, feeling that, you know, that separateness, which really is the source of all of our pain, is the separation between us and source. That is just a perceived separation, right? And so I was experiencing that very young. And there were many instances like that. And I believed the words. I believed it. I knew that it wasn't always going to be like that. And I didn't have that hopelessness. Whereas in that moment, I felt hopeless. So that's definitely a call towards a higher path, you know?
So at what point did you start being like, oh, that little voice isn't me? It's separate from me. And how did you figure out?
Oh my gosh. It took a lot longer than you would think. Like you would think it would be, it was early on in my sobriety where I really started, after I had my massive, you know, awakening or you know, sort of peeled back some of the layers of the onion and allowed myself to access the gifts that I had. I started, you know, really practicing with things like tarot cards, oracle cards, you know, looking at different channelers on YouTube and just obsessing over this type of stuff, which I'd always been interested in the metaphysical. I always was like the kid at the fair who wanted to go and see the gypsy psychic with the crystal ball. Like, I never understood why my friends didn't want to do that kind of thing. I thought it was crazy that wasn't the first thing they wanted to do. And it started with words. I was at that point completely clairvoyant and clairsentient, and all that other stuff was online. The clairaudience, fully to the point where I could like consciously tap into it anytime I wanted, because before it was like incidental. I was receiving messages, but there wasn't an intention with it on my end, right? So that started with words, and very quickly, within like a month or two, there was a very short period of time, maybe a week or two, where I was worried and my husband was worried about my mental health, because it came on very, very quickly. And it's so far removed from the way that we learn you are supposed to experience life normally, that it was jarring how quickly it came on. But I know now, having discussed it with my guides so much and worked through it with my guides so much, that it came at a pace that I was going to be able to manage, which was quick as far as like when it was time, like, okay, she's good, time to get going with this stuff, because we've got work for her to do. So within the course of like a couple of months, I first was like channeling my guides, and then I started to get pulled towards the Pleiadians, and I'm a Pleiadian starseed. So I've got a lot of past life experience in the Pleiades star system. And so I was just naturally pulled towards my galactic family, and I was watching channelers who were channeling them. And then I started channeling light language, which was crazy. If you've ever heard the way that the Pleiadians channel, it's a very high tone, high pitch, like it's a very interesting dialect. All of it's really interesting. But so when that came through, I kind of realized that I wasn't just channeling a group or assigned to like a specific group of beings, that I could channel whoever was willing to talk with me, like whoever was willing to communicate. And those beings are pretty much all of the benevolent beings that exist. anyone wants to support if they're able to. And that's what I found through my experience. So yeah, does that kind of answer the question?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so you brought in Pleiades and how you channel them. Who are the Pleiadians? And how did you start channeling them? Like hearing the other beings. That's so cool.
Oh my gosh. So the Pleiadians are our closest galactic ancestors. The majority of the starseeds on the planet right now are Pleiadian. Pleiadian or Arcturian. There are more Pleiadians than Arcturians. They are kind of like fifth dimensional versions of humans. They are the most humanoid looking extraterrestrial. So they're going to be the first in open contact because they look like humans, or because we look like them, depending on how you want to look at it. There are other non-humanoid looking Pleiadians as well, but the ones who are working directly with us are typically humanoid looking, particularly if they're going to like show themselves to us like physically. They kind of go in the galaxy where they can be of support. So right now they're supporting us. I have lots of channeled messages from them as to why they're supporting us. We do have genetic similarities. We have Pleiadian DNA. They are part of the Galactic Federation, and so they're supporting the ascension on the planet right now. So they are our galactic brothers and sisters, and they're loving and supportive, and they're unlike any other being that I've ever channeled. Like the love is so, the energy of it is so intense and so beautiful. It really feels like God is loving you when you are in the energy of a Pleiadian. It's quite beautiful. And how did I start channeling them? The thought of even like channeling them came from watching Wendy Kennedy, who is a channeler who channels the 90 Pleiadian Collective, who I've channeled as well. And I just felt so drawn to them. I'm trying to remember like the first time I actually channeled through a message. I think it started mainly with like just internal communication, and then realizing that I could just open my mouth and repeat what was coming out kind of thing. So there was a lot of like working with them and them supporting me directly on my spiritual journey. And that's really what they're wanting to do for all of us, is to support us in that way, individually and collectively. So yeah.
Ugh, so cool. What does it feel like to channel them or to hear them in your head? Like, are they on a specific side? Do they sound like your voice? What is it like?
It's interesting. So it depends on you ask such good questions, Lily. It depends on who I'm channeling. So, and it also depends on the dimension that they're operating on. So what I find is the lower dimensional beings, and the lowest that I would channel is 5D. So the lower dimensional beings, I can tell if it's a masculine voice or a feminine voice. I am hearing it in my mind. It's completely telepathic, so I'm hearing it verbally. I'm also receiving energetic information that's paired with it, so I have a deeper understanding of the message. So a lot of the time when I do readings for people, I will channel something for them, but I will say there's a context there that I can feel emotionally that I need to also explain. So I can with the lower dimensional beings. With the higher dimensional beings, they're typically channeling as a collective, so you're not necessarily going to hear like a unique voice. I guess it more sounds like my voice, but there is a pacing that is not mine. Like I can clearly tell the difference between my own pacing, I guess, my own internal pacing, and a higher dimensional collective. There's also can be like an accent, because specifically the Pleiadians, they work with tone and sound. So it's not a direct English to English translation. they are communicating through energy. It goes through an energetic filter. They use my English vocabulary to deliver the telepathic message. So it's not like, that's why there might be an accent or something. The pacing is off because it's not actually them just talking over here and me hearing it over here. There's a bit of a process that's happening. It is immediate, but it's like an energetic translator. It kind of goes through the message. So
yeah, in some odd way, it all makes total sense. That at the same
right.
time at the same time you're hearing them, you're also feeling them energetically. Yeah. Okay, so I think we should channel them. You want to head to part 2 so we can channel the Pleiades live?
We can. Oh my gosh. Okay, so we did connect with them before we started recording, and I had asked them if they wanted to channel a collective message or if they wanted to answer specific questions. And as I'm saying this, I'm feeling my crown start to buzz. So I know that they're preparing. They're laughing as well to come through. So just to be clear, we are channeling, and this is something I didn't mention, but, or maybe you've seen it on my, some of my social media channels, but, I am working directly with 2 fifth dimensional Pleiadians right now, a male and a female. They are family of mine from a past life. They just didn't leave that lifetime. I did in order to come to Earth. So they're actually in like their 400s, which is so crazy to me. I was in my 200s when I decided to leave my body and reincarnate here on Earth. And so they've reconnected with me, and that's who we are channeling today. That's who I had asked the question to earlier. So I always like to be specific when, yeah. Do you have any questions about any of that?
I just find it so fascinating. You're literally about to channel some of your family, just on a different...
Yeah, our galactic family. And you know what's really funny too is like when they first came to me directly, I recognized their energy and realized they had actually been with me for some time. Like I recognized the energy, but it's almost like they stepped forward and they're like, hey, we are individual 5th dimensional Pleiadians, and they're in physical bodies. Like they have physical bodies. So it's different than channeling a higher dimensional collective. They are not in physical bodies, and they operate more as a unity consciousness. So there's like, for example, the 9th dimensional Pleiadian collective is a group of about 2,500 Pleiadian souls that operate as an energetic collective to support. So it's very, very different. These are 2 individual extraterrestrial beings, which I think is so cool, you know?
It is in every way. All right, let's head to part 2 and channel them.
Okay.